Hello, and welcome to today's presentation 2025 Employment Laws and Workplace Trends, what every employer needs to know. My name is Andrea Diaz. I am so excited to be back here for another year. This is by far one of our most popular free webinars that we provide every year. So it's great to be here again. Great to see you all here again. A little bit to introduce myself if you are new this year and you don't know what Dominica is my business. It is an HR management firm. We specialize in creating and updating policies and procedures, working with small businesses and nonprofits that may not have regular HR support. We also work with medium-sized to larger companies to fulfill their HR support needs, and we are a Washington contractor. Um, Again, my name is Andrea Diaz. There's all my contact information as well. We have my contact information at the end of today's presentation should you have any follow-up questions. Today, we will be going over new legislation and reminders of last year, just so that we're all on the same page and we can make sure that we are in compliance at our workplaces. Recent legislation changes as well, and trends affecting the workplace in 2025. And then Washington and Seattle specific changes. I am located in Washington, as well as the business is located in Seattle, Washington. That's where a majority of our clients are. But of course, we serve businesses nationwide. Uh, Tips and strategy as well for staying in compliances with these new laws. So, why are we here today? Why is it important? Well, employment laws are subject to frequent changes and updates. I know in our state alone here in Washington, it seems like every few months there is an adjustment to one of our laws or a new law entirely affecting the workplace. And it's important to stay informed with those changes. There's legislation amendments, there's court decisions. I know we have a few very interesting court cases happening in the Supreme Court this year that we're going to talk about. And society shifts can also contribute to these changes as well. Knowing about the changes in legislation, knowing about the new laws, staying in compliance benefits your employees. It directly impacts their rights, working conditions, and legal protections they have in the workplace, as well as it is your responsibility as the employer to inform your employees to communicate these law changes. It also benefits the organization, the business operation. Failure to be in compliant with the latest laws can result in legal consequences such as fines, lawsuits, or regulatory actions. It can end up costing you a lot of money. And we want to be proactive this year, right? 2025, it's a new year. Let's be proactive and preventative instead of reactive and dealing with negative consequences. So here's just a few reminders of what happened last year, all the changes that we saw. Federally, OSHA decided that our forms were to be submitted electronically. This affects, of course, workplaces with 20 plus employees, your OSHA 300 forms. They created a portal in which you submit them annually. There was a non compete bill that got passed, and then it was challenged in court. So we're seeing a halt in that decision. But now we are seeing states pass their own laws in correspondence with this, which we will talk about happened in Washington this year. Salaried employees can now receive overtime. There was a salary threshold change. We are also going to be referring to this quite a bit throughout the presentation today. There was expanding protections to whistleblowers. And then in our state, Washington state, corporate officers had unemployment benefit restrictions. Basically, if you owned a certain portion of the business, you were not entitled to unemployment benefits. Um, Discrimination of hiring due to drug use was outlawed. You could not base your hiring decision based on a drug test result here in Washington. And then we had a Washington paid family medical leave expansion of our program here. This is a fairly new state program. So, of course, every year there, or every few months sometimes, there's going to be expansions. There's going to be adjustments in how they define certain things, certain eligibilities, amounts, etc. So, this program we're going to see continuously evolving in Washington. And we also had quite a few trends this year as a country, as a nation. Paid leave programs, a lot were coming out. A lot of states introduced their own paid leave programs. In Washington state, we already had one, but for example, we have like a separate paid sick leave bucket versus with as well. Some employers have both, so vacation time as well as sick leave. But we have a requirement in our state that employees are entitled to sick leave, and they accrue a certain amount after 40 hours, 1 hour per 40 hours of work. And this is determined also by your employment size. And then we also saw paid leave programs where come out in different states, like previously mentioned. We already have in Washington, we have a uh, medical paid medical leave program in Washington state that allows part-time and full-time employees to go on a leave that is paid, something they paid into with taxes from their paychecks. And we saw other states also introduce similar programs. Um, we saw employer AI use and compliance. Right now with AI, it's looking a little like the Wild West. Um, Companies are starting to use AI in their recruiting efforts, how they go through their candidates that apply for jobs. And I will just caution that we are going to be seeing a lot of laws coming up about this. We have seen AI be discriminatory towards these practices. There being errors, there's been concerns about private information, etc. So it's something that is very relevant. It's going to be relevant this year as well. And then we saw some fallout state bills last year from SCOTUS affirmative action ruling that was also last year. Saw some fallout with that. Um, States just introducing, restricting the use of DEI or the requirement of DEI training with their staff. We saw that in Florida. But we still have laws that refuke discrimination in hiring practices. We still have federal laws we have to follow, that you cannot be discriminatory in your hiring practices in your workplace as a whole. So those are going to be around to stay. It is the programs that are being challenged. Drug use discrimination restrictions as well. We saw in Colorado the drug use of um, mushrooms. I forget the medical term of what shrooms are considered, but uh, as that drug use is now, there were some laws about discrimination of that specific drug use, as well as the previous one I mentioned in Washington. In 2025, what is coming? What is now in effect? Actually, January 1. What is today's date? It is January 9th. So these laws are currently already in effect. So it is now to learn about them. It is now to uh, implement them in your workplaces so that you can be on the right side of history here by already being up to compliance with your workplace. So we have an overtime exemption salary threshold. There was plans of increasing this. So basically, what happened last year is they passed a law that salaried employees could now receive overtime. The exemption to this law is if they were over a certain salary, they could not receive overtime. So this salary, what's called a salary threshold, was going to be increased this year. It was halted in November of 2024, right before the new year, by a Texas federal court. So right now, the salary threshold remains $35,568 annually. So employees that get paid less than that can receive overtime. We saw a lot of fallout from this last year where workplaces were quickly increasing their salaries for their staff so that their staff could be exempt from receiving overtime. So if this were to occur again, we would see the same fallout there. The EEO1 reporting changes. So there are now new requirements in 2025 that include updates on demographic and job category data to support diversity initiatives as well. And then we have a focus on pay transparency. So there are new federal guidelines that encourage employers to include salary ranges in job posting and share compensation details to promote equality. In Washington state, we do not have to worry about changing this in our operations because this is already a requirement in Washington state. You have to provide a salary range in all of your job descriptions. And pay transparency is nothing but a good thing. It's encouraging the right candidates to apply for your jobs, and it's also encouraging equality in your workplaces. So, that being said, we had a lot of court challenges. We have a lot of interesting court cases coming up. So, what could potentially come up in the next few months of the new year? Well, we have a Supreme Court case on wage exemptions. So the US Supreme Court is reviewing cases that could redefine the standards of wage law exemptions, directly impacting how employers classify exempt and non-exempt workers. We also have workplace safety updates. In California state last year, they launched a requirement for a workplace violence prevention program that became on top of your accident prevention programs, which is also a requirement, you had to provide this additional program in your workplace. Well, we're seeing that federally we're following suit. We don't know if it's going to necessarily be a violence prevention program, but OSHA plans to implement updated safety standards across industries in 2025, emphasizing technology integration for hazard detection and reporting. So it's something to look out for as well. Court cases. So we have a discriminatory claim coming out, and it is creating a discussion around retired employees and disability. And then we also have an interesting court case coming out about religious exemptions. So right now, religious organizations are exempt from paying into unemployment taxes. Employees of religious organizations cannot receive unemployment benefits. We are now seeing that being challenged in our court systems. So more information to come out about that. So in Washington State, again, we're going to talk specifically about Washington State. If you found this presentation and you are not in Washington State, please feel free to reach out so I can provide some more information that's more relevant to your state. But in Washington State, we had quite a few new laws come out of this year. So our state minimum wage continues to increase. State minimum wage will increase to $16.66 an hour. That is our state minimum wage. Overtime exempt workers, the salary threshold has raised to $69,305.60 annually. So remember, I talked about the federal. At the federal level, they were going to pass a law increasing that salary threshold, but is now halted in court. Well, Washington decided, who cares if it's halted in court? We're going to pass our own law anyways. So this is now the new law. So any employees in an employer size of up to 50 employees, so 1 employee to 50 employees, the salary threshold is this 69,000 number. So if you have employees that make less than that, they are eligible to receiving overtime. And then if you are an employer size of 51 or more employees, the salary threshold is going to be $77,968.80 annually. So anyone making less than that is now eligible for overtime. Non-compete agreements. This is another federal law that was passed, approved. It was going to be implemented, and then it got challenged in court. So now it is halting at a federal level. But Washington decided, let's pass our own law. So non-compete agreements in Washington state can only be enforced for workers earning over $123,000. No, $123,394.17 annually. Whew, that's a mouthful. Or $308, 308 hundred no $308,485.43 for independent contractors. Woo! It's been a long day, y'all. So if workers are earning less than this, or if your independent contractor is earning less than this, a non-compete agreement cannot be enforced. So this is a great opportunity to look at your handbooks and see if you have any language of non-compete. In other words, other conflicting of interests. I've seen it worded. Any of those sections in your handbook, time to revise them, time to look over them and make sure that they do not resemble a non-compete agreement. Employer incentives. So maximum wage reimbursements for the stay-at-home preferred worker programs will increase to $25,000 per claim. I think it was $10,000 before, to support employers helping injured workers return to approved jobs. This is nothing but good news. So they are providing incentive to employers. If the employee gets hurt on the job, how can we return them to work quicker by maybe giving them a some more desk work so that they can take a rest, or maybe they can work at this site instead, or how can we get them to work and put that in place better, have better organizational practices for that. Paid sick leave. So this benefit will include care for more individuals. So like I said, Washington State already has a required sick leave program. We have a required accrual of sick time in Washington State. Now, this is very surprising for not a lot of new businesses I work with, but vacation time is not a requirement. You don't have to provide your employees with vacation time, but sick time is a state requirement. Paid sick time is a state requirement. So our state just expanded what you can use your sick time for, including anyone in the worker's home or those that they have a caregiving relationship with, and leave can now be used if the child's school or daycare is closed due to an emergency. So, really, we're just expanding what the definitions of a family member are, or a person that we have to care for that you can use your sick time for. And then it's also expanding why there might be a child's school or daycare closure. On a city level, what kind of changes do we have? So, this is if your business is incorporated in Seattle, because we have to follow city laws, we have to follow state laws, and we have to follow federal laws. So in Seattle, we had quite a few laws as well. So all employees will be paid the same minimum wage regardless of employment size. So, regardless of how big your business is, you have to pay the minimum of the uh, city minimum wage. Minimum wage, we saw an increase yet again for Seattle. It is now, the minimum wage is now $20.76. No. Oh my gosh, why am I having such a tough time with numbers today? It's $20.76 per hour is now our new minimum wage for Seattle. And then we had a lot of specific laws come out and protections for certain job types. So Going over these relatively quickly, we have for independent contractors, this was a law about independent contractors being paid on time. They have a right to do so. Businesses must provide timely payment within 30 days of the work being finished. It also talks about how the business has to provide specific information about the work prior to the work actually starting. So there's no such thing as just showing up as an independent contractor, not knowing what you're going to do this that day. Um, and then we have for hotel employees, there were 4 laws that were passed. Um, Improving access to medical care, requiring employees to make monthly health care expenditures to or on the behalf of covered employees. Um, there were more laws. There were the rest of the laws, the rest of the 3 laws passed were about protections related to job retention, such as room cleaning workload limits, additional pay, and protecting the hotel employees from violent or harassing guests' conduct. We also have some laws coming out for domestic workers. This is what the state has labeled as domestic workers, so nannies, house cleaners, gardeners, cooks, etc. And cooks refers to home cooks. Certain home care workers as well, which is a pretty generalized label, but they have a right to minimum wage. They have a right to rest breaks and meal periods, the upkeep of personal documents, and a day for rest as well. And then we have for retail and food establishments. So, those that have 500 plus employees worldwide, including all franchises, this also impacts them. Employers must provide employees with a notice of work schedules at least 14 days in advance, extra compensation for late schedule changes, and extra compensation for back to back closing, opening shifts without adequate rest time. Um, that's a big one. We have app based workers as well, often referred to as gig workers. We have some protections there. And then cannabis employees, um, it talks about the ownership of the cannabis organization as a whole, if there's a change, um, different hiring practices of these organizations, etc. So, what are some trend tips, recommendations for staying into compliance with some of the new laws listed, the new programs being in place? Well, first, let's cover the trends. So, we have workplace trends that we're seeing coming up in this new year. We have an increase in pay transparency. I talked a lot about that. More companies are now prioritizing transparency to foster equality, equity, and comply with emerging compensation related laws. We have AI compliance, which I've already talked a little bit about. Um, Employers must ensure compliance with legal and ethical guidelines addressing concerns about bias, transparency, and data privacy. We have expansions of paid leave, focus on mental health support. That is a big one. We are seeing now that employers are investing more in mental health support systems, programs, resources to support employee well being. Uh, Remote and hybrid work models. So, a lot of legal and regulatory changes are encouraging flexible work agreements with businesses, adapting to more permanent remote and hybrid models. Higher minimum wage and overtime regulations as well. Businesses are adjusting their compensation. I talked about this, how we saw that outcome of a lot of businesses just increasing their salaries because they didn't want to have to pay overtime for their employees that went below that salary threshold there, and we can expect this, a lot of these to come up regularly as we see these court cases coming up, um, etc. So, what are some tips and recommendations to be prepared Be proactive instead of reactive this year. That is really what we're working for. You can incorporate that as your new workplace mantra if you'd like. I'll allow you to steal it. An example of this is the workplace violence prevention. So I mentioned that OSHA is going to be coming out with new safety requirements in the workplace. So, to be proactive instead of reactive, maybe start thinking about what safety challenges your employees are dealing with daily that you can help mitigate by doing training, implementing processes and procedures. What is your reporting structure like? Having all of these programs in place before they start becoming a requirement by law. Have and always update your policies and procedures. We recommend updating your handbook at a minimum annually. That's how often these laws change, especially if you are in a state that has a lot of changes regularly. Illinois is a big one, California, Colorado, uh, Rhode Island, New York. These are states that have constant changes. So it's important to update your handbook so that you can stay in compliance. Update the communication and your posters. So this is your reminder right now that you should have the newest minimum wage poster in your possession, displayed on your compliance board for all of your employees to see. Even if you have salaried employees, that poster needs to be up there. There are several posters that you need up and running, up for everyone to see in order to be compliance with the law. Because if L&I comes knocking on your door, that is one of the first places they will head. And that is a big violation fine right there. So make sure you are up to date with all of your communication. Again, it is your duty as an employer to make sure that your employees are informed of their rights, of the new laws, of their responsibilities with any of these legislative changes or policy changes. Having regular training with your staff. Maybe you have all of your managers watch this video. I don't know. You have a talk about the new policies, the new procedures coming out with your organization. Having regular training is always going to be a requirement, and it's always going to work in your best interest. And the best way to stay informed. Washington L&I know our L&I department has a subscription base you could subscribe to, get all their news, get their law updates sent directly to your email. We also have a few local law firms that have their own newsletters, their own free webinars that I highly recommend. Uh, our website, dominicahrm.com, has a blog. It has free resources such as this, our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to it as well. Helps you stay informed, helps you stay in the know. And then hire a consultant. If you have an administrator that also does all of your HR tasks, might be time to hire someone temporarily, maybe even just for a day, to come in, put these things on the radar of your administrator, or just help out where needed. Um, so, just to wrap it up here, we went over the legislative changes federally, by state, by the city of Seattle. We went through what happened last year, some workplace trends to look out for, and then also some tips and recommendations. Right now, we are and always offering affordable HR services. Handbook and policies updates. These are some services that we recommend doing right now while it's fresh in your mind. Employment growth advisory, compliance overhauls, additional HR support. If you are a new employer, we offer a consultation. It is just an hour of your time. It will help you feel confident to maybe hire your first employee. What do you need to know? What are some considerations that you need to have in order to make the best decisions for your team? It goes similarly, if you're going to expand your team, what are some considerations of employment size? Because once you start increasing your employment size, you have more regulations that you need to follow. So There's my contact information yet again. My little bubble is hiding it. Feel free to go back on the title slide to see my information. And thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. Please reach out if you have any questions. Appreciate the support there if you subscribe to dominicahrm.com, and I'll see you next time.